Hi, welcome to TSAT. So we are discussing the concept that's measures of national income as part of Indian economy, and let's look at the third part. So in the previous two sessions we discussed about the different types of goods, the definition of national income, and then in the previous session we discussed about various measures of income like GDP, GNP, NDP, NNP, isn't it? And then we discussed about national income with factor cost, market prices. But let me ask you a simple question. Why is it all the countries across the globe, in spite of having different measures of income like GDP, GNP, NDP, isn't it? We have discussed lot many. Why every nation is only fond of expressing their output in terms of GDP? Many times you might have noticed that the national output or the national income of most of the countries, including the developed countries like United States of America or European nations or emerging countries like India, China, or poor countries like Pakistan, everyone expresses their income only in the terms of GDP. In spite of having various other alternates like GNP, NNP and all these things, why only GDP? The very simple reason is GDP corresponds to the domestic production, because it is the total economic activity that takes place in domestic territory of that country is the one that represents more amount of, the absolute worth of economic activity taking place in the country, isn't it? So because what is the economic activity that takes place in my country, that decides the prosperity of my nation, rather than what my people produce outside my country. That's the very basic reason people happen to use GDP as a very common measure of national income. Now let's go ahead and look at other measures of national income. But before going ahead, let me also start with the last one here in this case, that's the per capita income. Per capita, it does mean per head, that's it. It's simply computed as national income divided by the total population of the country. So if you divide the total national income and with the total population of the country, what you get is per capita income, okay, per head, something like an average. Similarly, you could call this GDP per capita. When I say GDP per capita, what is it? The GDP of the nation divided by the total population. So how would you get a GDP per capita? GDP divided by the population, that's it, the total population of the country, that's it. Now let's look at disposable income and discretionary income. But before going into disposable income and discretionary income, let me make it clear with, I would explain this with in the context of an individual, so that it would be easy for you to understand. Let's say there is an individual, myself, and my personal income. Let's start with my personal income. So if I am working for a company, the company ends up making a promise to me that this is the total amount of salary that we will be paying you per month. Let's say the company promised me 3 lakh rupees per month as salary, and this income that I am earning from this company is what I call as my personal income. But if the company promised me 3 lakh rupees, do you really think at the end of every month I would receive 3 lakh rupees absolute amount in my bank account? No. There would be some deductions like the tax, tax would be deducted at the source, TDS, isn't it? So there would be some amount of PF card, isn't it? So there would be some amount of deductions or compulsory payments that I ought to make to the state. And after deducting certain amount of my compulsory payment that I am liable to pay to the state, the rest of the money I get, what is get credited into my bank account is what I call as a disposable income. I mean the income at my disposal, the income at my disposal. Not all the income you make, because in this country you are liable to pay at least the tax, that is an income tax, if you are making some income more than 2.5 lakhs. So there are some compulsory payments one has to make to the state. Deducting those compulsory payments from your personal income, whatever is left is what is called disposable income. And then the last one here in this context is discretionary income. Discretion does mean, I hope you understand the literal meaning of the word called discretion. The way you would like to, it's up to you, isn't it? The money that you could spend as per your own whims and fancies. So let's say if you are making 1 lakh rupees per month, do you really think you could spend all this 1 lakh rupees the way you want to? No. Living in a city like Hyderabad, you need to meet some expenses like the khana pina, roti, kapda, makan, the food, clothing, shelter, isn't it? So there are some necessary expenditures that you are going to make. If you are living in a rented flat, you are bound to pay the rent. If you are simply buying an internet services, you are going to pay the internet bill. So there is some compulsory expenditure that you are going to make, necessary expenditure, or what we call maintenance expenditure, isn't it? So once you meet your basic necessary expenditure, whatever the amount of money that you are left with after meeting your basic necessities is what is said to be called as discretionary income, or the income that you could spend as per your own the difference between per capita income, disposable income, personal income and discretionary income. Now let's go ahead and look at the other most important concept, that is nominal GDP and real GDP. And we will be using these terms nominal and real in many contexts. Right now we are discussing in the context of GDP. Similarly, later we will be discussing about nominal income, real income, nominal interest rate and real interest rate. Later we will discuss about nominal exchange rate, real exchange rate, nominal effective exchange rate, real effective exchange rate. So, there might be ample instances where we will be coming across the terms called nominal and real. Let me make it the very simple difference between the nominal and term real. When it comes to real, the real output is anything that is expressed as a basket of goods and services. I mean anything expressed in terms of goods and services is what we call as a real output or real variable. Nominal is something that is expressed in terms of monetary value. I mean in terms of money value, monetary value. Or technically speaking, real variable is nominal variable adjusted to inflation. Nominal variable adjusted to inflation. I mean if you remove the component of inflation from nominal variable, whatever you would be getting is what we call real variable. So, now let me make it clear with what is the difference between nominal GDP and a real GDP. Nominal GDP technically is defined as GDP measured at market prices, at current market prices. Let us say our country produces a basket of output, and the worth of output the country produces, if you measure at the current prevailing market prices, we call that as nominal GDP. So, nominal GDP is simply GDP measured at the current prevailing market prices. So, if you take this particular pencil and this is the only pencil, I mean imagine this country produces only one unit of output and this is the only pencil. So, the value of this pencil right now measured at the market price is what I call as the GDP or nominal GDP. But real GDP is expressed as GDP measured at constant prices, or what we call it as a base year prices. So, generally as of now you might be aware of the fact we have this base year somewhere around 2011-12 as the base year. I mean if I am measuring the current value of output. So, this year my country our country might have, in our country we produce some output. If this output is being measured at the prices prevailing in a year, right now let us say at the prices prevailing in 2011-12. I mean if I am trying to estimate the value of the same stencil at a price prevailing in 2011-12, in such case that particular GDP is called as a real GDP. So, what I am simply doing is that since 2011-12 to 2022, there might have been an enormous increase in price of various basket of goods and services because of inflation. So, if I remove and ignore that aspect of inflation since 2011-12 and I am trying to account the value of this output of this year at a prices prevailing in a particular base year, I would call that as a real GDP. So, nominal GDP, real GDP, the difference is the way we compute it. In both the cases, we are computing the value of output produced by the country in a particular year. But in the first case, I am computing the output at a prices prevailing in the current market prices, whatever is the price right now in the market. When it comes to the second case, I am trying to compute the same at a prices prevailing in a base year, and that is the difference between nominal and real GDP. Okay. And now let us go ahead and try to understand one important concept, that is Okun's law. Okun's law. So, Okun's law is simply named after an economist who happened to come with this particular establishment. Okun is an economist who established a relation between the unemployment rate in an economy, and growth in an economy. So, according to this gentleman, whenever there is an increase in unemployment rate, by 1%, there is a fall. The economy might end up losing an output or the growth of approximately 2%. For every rise in unemployment rate by 1%, this gentleman ends up simply saying the economy might experience the growth, fall in growth by around 2%. So, this gentleman, it's not necessarily true for every economy, it is an empirical observation. It's an empirical. So, given from a given set of data, this gentleman has made an observation and he just want to convey the fact that if your economy is not able to utilize its fullest potential or the maximum amount of resources, what would be the loss of output the economy might experience, and that's what he happened to convey, and that particular law is what is very popularly called as Okun's law. And the reason why I have discussed this Okun's law is to let you understand the concept of growth, because the next part is what we are going to compute, that's a growth. So, how is growth measured and what exactly is called as growth of an economy? And I am revising it one more time. What I mean to say, Okun's law is simply a law that depicts the relation between how unemployment would have an effect upon the output of an economy, or what we call the growth of a particular economy. So, now let us go ahead and look at what exactly is the growth of an economy. So now let's say imagine in the last year a country produced 100 shirts. This year the country produced 100 shirts. So this increase in output by what amount? 10. So compared to last year we have increased, there is an increase in output by 10 shirts, and these 10 shirts over the previous output, that is 100, okay, expressed in terms of percentage is nothing but 10%, isn't it? So I could say in this example that this economy compared to the previous year has experienced a 10% increase in output, a 10% increase in output. If you remember the concept of national income, I ended up simply saying the income of a nation increases only with increase in output. And this increase in output or production of an economy is what we call it as a growth. So growth is a measure of rate of change or rate of increase in production of goods and services, rate of increase in production of goods and services in an economy, production of goods and services in a economy. That's what's called as a growth rate. Now, what's the formula to compute a growth rate of an economy? Growth rate is computed using the formula that is real GDP. Growth rate is computed using the formula that is real GDP of N minus real GDP. I guess you understand the meaning difference between nominal and real GDP, and isn't it? So we only take the real GDP into consideration to measure the growth rate, not nominal GDP. So real GDP of N, and N stands for current year. Current, N minus 1 stands for previous year. So what is that we are trying to do is the real output of this year minus the real output of the previous year divided by the output of the previous year multiplied by 100 gives you the growth rate. Now let's say, imagine if you have come across in the newspaper or the government of India has reported that there is a 12% of growth rate of this country in the year of financial 21-22. Just imagine. Of course, that's not the correct growth rate for 21-22. I'm just giving an example. If the government report that there is a 12% growth rate in the year of 21-22, it does mean, or how would you interpret this? Compared to the financial 2021, the increase in production of goods and services in the economy has gone up by 12%. There is a 12% increase in the overall production of goods and services when compared to the previous year. Okay. Similarly, imagine if you have come across a news that the third quarter of financial year 22-23. Okay, of course, this third quarter as of now is not yet being counted. So I think you are aware of the fact Q3. Okay, so we generally divide the accounting year of financial into 4 different quarters for every 3 months of the time period, isn't it? So April, May, June is the first quarter, and then followed by the second quarter, July, August, September. Okay, or you could divide the entire financial into 2 different halves. So here in this case, I am just simply comparing. If not Q3, let's start with Q1. Okay, so Q3 is not yet done, and that's the reason. Let's say the Q1 of financial year 22-23. You have come across a news that there is an increase in growth rate by 8%. And how do you interpret this? When there is a growth rate of 8% in the Q1 22-23, it simply conveys the fact that compared to the same period, that is the first quarter of financial year 21-22, okay, compared to the same period of the previous financial year, the increase in the output in the country has gone up by 8%. So that's how you need to understand. Okay, let's say tomorrow you just again come across a different Q2 growth rate is 6% in the financial year of 22-23. So here in this case, when I say Q2 growth rate, I mean second quarter's growth rate is 6%. It is not in comparison to the first quarter, it is compared to second quarter of the previous financial year 21-22. So this is what we call measuring the growth or measuring the change on a point to point basis. So Q3 growth does mean Q3 with the previous financial year. Q4 does mean Q4 with the previous financial year, but not with Q3 or Q3, okay, isn't it? Not with the previous quarter. We don't compare with previous quarter, we compare with the same period of the previous year. That's how we generally compute a growth rate of an economy, or simply growth is simply a measure of increase in production of goods and services. That's it. So if there is an enormous increase in production of goods and services, the economy is said to experience a growth. If the amount of production of goods and services is falling, then we say the economy is experiencing contraction. Or if the growth rate is negative, I think these days you might be aware of the fact there is a debate going on in United States of America, since US is experiencing a contraction or a negative growth or fall in production of goods and services for the past 2 quarters. Okay, they are right now in a dilemma whether to define right now economy of USA. What exactly state of economy? Is it in recession? Okay, because recession technically mean any economy experiencing contraction of economic activity or fall in economic activity, or negative growth rate for 2 consecutive quarters, the economy is set to experience a recession. And right now United States of America is in such. It's not only United States of America, large number of economies across the globe are about to experience a recession because of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war and increase in the oil prices. I think you might be aware of all this news. So having seen different measures of income, different types of goods and services, now let's comprehend the entire Indian economy in a single snapshot. What exactly state of Indian economy, and let's look at from the the most trusted source, that's none other than economic survey. So if you look at 4 years of data, let's start with GDP growth at constant prices. You could remember, so this GDP growth is measured at constant prices. Does mean here in this case we are considering the real GDP. So, and what is the economic survey says? In 1920, in the financial of 1920, we experienced a 4% growth rate, and 2021 we experienced a contraction in growth. If you look at it, that's a minus 7.3. Isn't it? In the this year we experienced a minus 7.3 growth rate. It's a negative. Why is it so? You and me know the fact that because of COVID, there is almost for 70-80 days the economy has been come to halt, isn't it? So no activity has taken place. That's the reason in 2021, not only India, a large number of economies, almost every country across the globe has experienced a contraction in economic activity, and that's the reason that year we reported a negative growth rate, and immediately the very next year we bounced back to 9.2. That's been compared to this year, there is an increase in output by 9.2. You might be thinking, my God, India has experienced really a great recovery, but I think you are aware of the fact this is all because of base effect. This is generally more or less what we call as a base effect. So, because in the previous year there has been a large amount of fall in output, a considerable increase in output results in a great increase in growth rate, and that's the basic reason. Because of the base effect, there has been a tremendous increase in growth rate. And then in the next year, 22-23, isn't it? It's projected. By the time the economic survey has been published, it is anticipated that we might be receiving experiencing growth rate of 8 to 8.4%. And the second most important is fiscal deficit. And we are expressing this fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP. So fiscal, I think you are aware of the fact the word fiscal represents treasury or purse. I mean, you know the difference between surplus and deficit. Excess we represent with the term called surplus, shortage we represent with the term called deficit. So in this case, when it comes to the term fiscal deficit, it is simply the gap between the total expenditure and total income of the government of India. So if your expenditure, if the government's expenditure is more than its total revenue or total income, then the government is said to have a deficit. So when you have a deficit, what is the simple thing you do? You borrow money. So the amount of money you are expected to borrow in a financial year, if you express it as a percent of GDP, generally we happen to represent with a term called fiscal deficit. And if you look at this particular 4 years, 2021, because of COVID, our fiscal deficit is very high, because government of India has implemented very large number of populistic schemes, large number of welfare schemes. I'm sorry, it's not populistic. I would rather say it's a welfare schemes, isn't it, for the sake of protecting these people. And that's the basic reason. I think you would be aware of the fact the amount of food grain distributed to all the people, and free transportation, and then the vaccines. You might be, the government has spent a lot of money, and that's the reason the 2021 the government has ended up borrowing a very large proportion of money, and when it expressed as a percent of GDP, that was roughly around 9.2, and this year there's been a considerable fall in the fiscal deficit, that's up to 6.8%. Now coming to the second most important parameter to judge the economic well-being, is inflation. So the green line indicates the wholesale price index based inflation. In the next particular lecture, we will be discussing about the difference between the wholesale price index and CPI. But both the cases, I think you are aware of the fact these are two different ways of measuring the rate of increase in price of goods and services. But at the end of the day, they convey the fact the rate at which prices of goods and services are increasing. And now coming to the other most important thing is the forex reserves. So forex reserve simply includes the amount of foreign currency, the SDRs, the gold that we Indians have accumulated over a period of time. As of now, if you could look at it, there has been a considerable increase in the total forex reserves that we have accumulated. And similarly, let me also make it clear with respect to the term called import cover. Import cover refers to the amount of foreign currency or forex reserve that a nation has. The import cover refers to the amount of foreign currency that is required to meet your import bill for a certain period of time. Now let's say if Indian economy maintains a forex reserves that is enough to meet the import bill of this country for a year, then in such case the nation is said to have an import cover of 1 year. Or if your forex reserves are enough only for meeting your import bill for only 1 month, then you are said to have an import cover of only 1 month. So larger is import cover, or more is the forex reserves, more would be your import cover. I mean, you could use it for meeting your import bill for a larger span of time, and you could notice the fact we are doing really good with increase in forexes. And then how are three different sectors of economy performing in the past 4 years? If you look at it, generally I think you are aware of the fact we divide Indian economy into three different sectors. I mean, whatever contributes to the economy, we categorize into three different sectors. Okay, ideally, okay, primary sector, secondary sector, tertiary sector. Rather than simply defining primary sector, simply does mean sector that deals with natural resources, a direct interaction with natural resources. Secondary sector is sector where, okay, we happen to transform the raw materials or natural resources into some industrial goods, isn't it, or some goods and services. That's the secondary sector. Tertiary sector is synonymous with the service sector. Whereas in India, we happen to categorize the economy into three different sectors. One is agriculture and elite sector, forestry, fishing, okay, and then the industrial sector, which includes mining, quarrying, manufacturing, electricity, construction, and other utility services, okay, and lastly the service sector. And if you look at these all sectors, so agriculture sector, in spite of, I mean, even during COVID, has performed relatively better because we people allowed the agriculture activity to continue during even COVID, but you could see the industrial growth has been, okay, negative, and same is the case in 2021, and now in this 22, okay, we started recovering. This is the state of Indian economy, okay, that comes from economic survey. And I think the same whatever is been discussed is been presented. Now let's look at, okay, the very basic purpose of giving you this kind of presentation here in this case. I just want you to note down the most important aspect. What is the contribution of each sector to the overall GVA or gross value addition? I mean, which particular sector, okay, in which particular sector the value addition is taking place relatively larger amount. So if you look at, okay, the current 21-22 advanced estimates, 53% of value addition in the economy happens to be from a service sector, okay. And then if you look at industry sector, it is 28.2. So roughly, okay, if you think, okay, better I would ask you to go for 28%, round it to 28%, and agriculture sector, the value addition takes place at 19%. I'm just rounding it to 19%. Or one more thing that I just want you to note down is that if you look at the value addition that is taking place, especially in manufacturing sector, it's hardly, or it's roughly approximately, okay, around 15.5%, or you could simply round it to 16%. So one thing that you should notice the fact is that the value addition taking place in agriculture sector seems to be relatively better than compared to manufacturing sector. It does mean, okay, it does mean even after liberalization in 1991, there is hardly, or there is, okay, any considerable improvement in the manufacturing sector in India, and that's a very basic reason. I think you know the right now the current, okay, the reason why central government, I mean the current Narendra Modi sub government is looking after promoting Make in India, Atmanirbhar Bharat, because there is a huge amount of shortfall in, okay, achieving the total output when it comes to manufacturing sector in this country, isn't it? So that's the reason recently you've been aware of the fact the government is also trying to, okay, alter the SEZ Act of 2005 for the sake of promoting manufacturing activity in this country, and that's a very basic reason why I happen to present this particular facts. So it is very essential to remember what is the value addition. I hope you remember what exactly is the definition of a value addition, isn't it? The contribution of labor and capital during various stages. And before concluding the topic of income and growth, let me also make it clear with respect to the very important term called GDP deflator. So how is GDP deflator, okay, computed? GDP deflator is computed by using a very simple formula, that is nominal GDP divided by real GDP multiplied by 100. Nominal GDP divided by real GDP multiplied by 100. So what is the very basic purpose of GDP deflator? It is used to measure inflation. So how an economy is experiencing increase in prices of goods and services over a period of time could be used or could be computed using this particular term, that is called GDP deflator. Let me show you how the inflation rate is calculated using GDP deflator. The formula to compute inflation rate using GDP deflator is GDP deflator. So we compute the GDP deflator. How do you compute it? Divide the nominal with real GDP and simply, okay, the rate of change in GDP deflator, that means GDP deflator of n minus GDP deflator of n minus 1, deflator of n minus 1 divided by GDP deflator of n minus 1 multiplied by 100 gives you the rate of inflation. So imagine you have substituted the values. N stands for the current year, n minus 1, as you are already aware, stands for previous year. Imagine at the end of the day we happen to substitute the values, and finally we got to know the inflation rate is 10%, that is computed using GDP deflator. And what does this number 10% speak? This says compared to the previous financial year, that is financial year, let's say 2021, let's say this 10% is for the financial year of 21-22. What does it say? Compared to the previous financial year 2021, the financial year 21-22 experienced a overall increase in prices of basket of goods and services produced in India by over 10%. By over 10%. Of course, there are different measures of computing inflation, that is using wholesale price index, price index, consumer price index, producer price index, service price index. But the very common way of measuring inflation, the overall measure of inflation, or how is the prices of basket of goods and services produced in the country is experiencing a rise, could also be computed using this term called GDP deflator. The reason why I have discussed is because I just want to make it clear that even nominal and real GDPs could also be used to compute not only growth rate of economy, they are also used to compute a deflator. Okay, so I mean to say the inflation. And finally, the most important thing that I would leave it to you is, in the process of computing the national income, or what we call GDP, what are the things that we miss out in computing GDP? The first thing is the household activity. This is something unaccounted. And the most important is the black money, anything, black money transaction. The third is, here in this case, I just want to represent this as a green GDP, the impact on environment, or any economic activity, or any activity that takes place in the name of barter system. So these are certain economic activities that would not be accounted as part of GDP, isn't it? So the service rendered by, a mother at home or woman at home, isn't it? Or the black money transactions or barter systems, or any free service delivered. I think you understand the difference between basically an economic activity and social activity. Anything that has a value and a price attached could only be called as an economic activity. Let's say if you people volunteer to clean the roads of Hyderabad, then it is called a social activity. But if someone is, if some municipal worker is doing the same in return for a certain amount of money, then it's called as an economic activity. So only economic activity which has some price attached could be accounted as part of GDP. At the same time, there might be a lot of activity takes place which could not be accounted as part of our GDP, and that's what I have listed it here. Finally, what I would leave it to you as an exercise is, who computes all these measures of income, GDP, GNP. I am giving it to you a clue. So please do go through this particular Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation and find out what does NSO stand for and what is, isn't it? So what does this particular ministry does and what is NSO? So that helps in understanding who computes this GDP. I am leaving it a clue for you people. And I think in the past 3 sessions we discussed about various types of goods, what is the definition of income, various methods of computing national income, various measures of income, and how to compute growth or change in production economy using these particular measures. And finally, we have seen how to measure inflation using nominal and real GDP, and the things that we are missing in computing GDP. And the last thing we are, I am expecting you to do is, who does compute GDP in this country? Who is responsible? Which part of the government is responsible in computing this information related to GDP? That's what I will leave it to you. And this completes the topic, measures of national income and growth. We spent considerably enough time for this because this is most important topic that's required for your examination. And we'll go ahead with the next topic, that's inflation. So having seen how to compute inflation using GDP deflator, we'll try to explore the concept of inflation in the coming session.